Welcome to the UNLOQ podcast, an innovative approach towards human development. My name is Amanda, and today I am joined by Alex Villar-Hauser. Alex has been an executive leadership coach and organizational change consultant since 1995. Before that, he led his own business in New York. Alex has a successful track record in working with leaders to measurably improve business results. He does this by working with senior teams and individuals on live business issues through leading organizational change projects and by coaching leaders to engage the whole organization in the delivery of results. He's a coach, a director at Jarron Consulting, and an UNLOQ associate. So Alex, welcome. Would you like to add anything to your introduction?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amanda. No, that's awesome. Just to say that I do that work in German, in Spanish, and in Italian because my mother was Austrian, my father is Spanish, and I was lucky enough to grow up speaking those languages. And I speak Italian because my parents spoke Italian with each other. That was the language they had in common. So I'm kind of lucky in that way to be able to do that globally and internationally. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that as well, because it's very relevant to everything that you do, and especially how you connect with people in their, native language. So today we are talking about organizational change, and you're the expert here. So I'm going to start by defining it briefly. So organizational change is also known as organizational transformation, is the process through which a company or any organization alters a major component of its operations, structure, culture, or goals. It can be either intentional or unplanned and can occur due to various factors such as economic pressures, changes in leadership, advancements in technology, market trends, and shifts in customer demands. The process of organizational change aims to improve efficiency, productivity, and profitability by adapting to the dynamic environment and enhancing the organization's ability to meet the needs of its stakeholders. So let's start by, how would you define organizational change, and why is it important for businesses and institutions to embrace and navigate change effectively?
Cool. Thank you, Amanda. Well, you've summarized a really good technical and correct interpretation of organizational change. So I'm adding to it by looking at the human system element, or the human element, which is that human beings are adapting all the time. I mean, if you think about it, 30, 40 years ago, in large tracts of China, the cities were tiny in comparison to where they are now. Shanghai has grown exponentially, Beijing has grown exponentially, and people are used to living and adapting to living environments which are really quite distressing and difficult. They live in smog-filled environments whilst having cigarettes. So we're very adaptable to change. And what we're not very good at is preempting change. As a species, and I think as humanity, we know the changes that are coming towards us in relation to keeping to 1.5 degrees or below. But we're so invested in the systems that we have and our lifestyle that we are simply, even though we have that knowledge, simply not preempting the changes, which means that when you react to change, you've got a lot less time to respond to it. And usually it's a lot messier and a lot more painful. So I've spent the last 30, 35 years working with senior leaders in organizations to help them to work on preemptive, not reactive change. And I'll give you an example of that, because sometimes the people I've worked with myself have not been successful. About 15 or more years ago, a team of people that I was very proud, and still am very proud to work with, were working with and had worked a lot with Nokia. You remember Nokia, the mobile phone company?
Yes, I do.
I was on another flight to Finland, after many different flights to Finland, and I was sitting next to a very senior executive, a board member, on the plane. And as the plane landed in Helsinki, in Vantaa, the doors opened, and at that time you couldn't have your mobile phone on, so everybody switched their mobile phones on. And I don't know if you remember, this is me showing my age, but it used to go dun 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 dun, that sound, right? And he turned around to me and said, the sound of market share. because literally the whole plane just went on with Nokia. Now, where is Nokia now? Well, Nokia is still a very successful and very large organization, but they no longer do feature phones or smartphones. They became an acquisition by Microsoft and were written off as a rounding area by Satya Nadella when he closed down the mobile phone business. Who invented touch? Who invented what we now call as the iPad or the tablet? Nokia engineers. I think Samsung and Apple pay to the tune of many billions of dollars a year to Nokia for the royalties to be able to use their phones and the technology that's embedded in those phones. Why was that? Because the board members at the time said people won't want touch. And so the thing that we need to get better at as a species and as business leaders is how do we do preemptive change? How do we stop being invested in, like the oil companies currently are, in continuing oil exploration, and re-gearing to real green energy, which they have plenty of capital funds to do, but don't quite seem to be able to re-gear towards at the speed that's required. And it is that attachment to being blind, even though we know, but we don't know down here, to what is required of us in terms of change, which is what is the difficulty. That's what makes organizational change or any change so difficult. We know that we're invested in staying as we are.
This connected with me, like with the story of Netflix as well, right? That's kind of one of the most popular books that it's about kind of organizational change. So I just connected this and the Nokia story, which is a couple of years closer to this generation, right? But it's also important that we see, you know, all the examples that they are out there on the organizational change and how we have been, you know, withholding a culture of kind of standing to a position that's no longer, you know, feasible. So thank you for that example. So what role does leadership play in driving and managing organizational change, and what specific leadership qualities or strategies do you believe are important in guiding employees through this change process?
So one is to recognize that change needs to happen, that there is a change that has happened. So if there's a change in your context, and leaders, I think, are paid to help people to change their contexts. So what you're doing is you're saying, hey, this is what we used to do. This has worked for us for this period of time. Now we need to change our context because the context around us has changed. We need to respond to that. And now we need to go over here and do something else. And if it isn't happening from the top, if it doesn't happen from the very top and that recognition isn't there. So the first quality that leadership plays in driving and managing organizational change is recognizing it needs to happen. And then once that's happened, what typically occurs in many organizations is that the intellectual case for change. So one of the first change leaders, change coaches in history of Western civilization was Aristotle in 356 BC. He was responsible for and led a school of rhetoric for generals, where he was working with leaders to how do they organize very comfortable Greek city-state soldiers or citizens to join the phalanx to defend themselves against the Persian army, who could field 1 million men. So it was an existential, intergenerational conflict for survival. How do you get those people who are living in their olive groves, slave-based society? I'm doing fine. Why would I leave my hometown? Why would I do that? How do you do that? And he said, you don't need just to make the case intellectually. What you need to do is you also need to, and we called it logos. What is the logos? What is the case that you're making? Does it make sense? And then the thing he said is, he was the first leadership philosopher in the West who did walk the talk. He said there has to be an ethos. You have to live the change that you want to see. If we fast forward, be the change you want to see with Gandhi, you actually have to role model that change. And so what are the behaviors that you as a board member, as a senior leader, role modeling that are consistent with the new behaviors that you want to see? So typically what happens is that the senior leaders make the case, They usually spend 3, 4, 5 weeks, 6 months working with McKinsey or other consultants to then figure out how to do that. It becomes intellectually coherent to them. They send everybody a PowerPoint and then say, okay, guys, let's have a few road shows and now let's do it. And that's not enough. They need to role model again and again and again that behavior. And Aristotle suggested that leaders in his context needed to stand in front of the phalanx and be willing to be strategically cut, risk their lives to show their soldiers that they were leading the way. So how are you demonstrating that this change is difficult for you? How are you changing your own behaviors instead of just saying, well, I've told you what the idea is, now go and make it happen? And then finally, he said, the thing that will really get you out of your olive grove and into that phalanx or getting behind that change is if you emotionally identify with that change. And you cannot emotionally identify with the change unless the leader in front of you has emotionally identified with the change. So it makes sense. That's the logos. I'm doing the best I can with my change in behavior, and I care about this. And Aristotle said the thing that kills that is when there is a dissonance between logos, the ethos, and the pathos. And he invented the word. He called it pathologia. And what we're really sick of and what employees are really tired of is when they hear leaders say, we need to do this, it's a big change, but I'm going to be carrying on doing what I've always done. It's you guys who need to fix what you need to fix, do it. So there has to be an accord between those three states of being. And if you do that often enough, if you role model those three things, that's what it takes. That's what it'll do. You'll do that 1,000 times and you have your change because it's happening because it's being role modeled from the top. Yeah. So lead by example. It's nothing more complicated. It's easy to say, easy to understand, and really difficult to do. And the work that I do is around simply working with those leaders about how you're changing your behavior. How is your behavior aligned with the future that you're looking for?
Yeah, how to embody everything that you're saying. You very hardly
how to embody that change. That's beautiful. I'll keep that.
You're welcome. So how do you foster a culture of continuous improvement and adaptability within an organization? And what steps do you or would you take to encourage employees to embrace change as an opportunity for growth?
So I'll give you an example of an asset management company in the finance sector that an employee is about 3,000 people, a multinational global organization, part of a bigger institutional bank, well-known bank, needed to triple operating profit in 3 years. And the leader who led the change, and I learned a lot from him. He was very inspiring in many ways and not in others. He basically said, if we tell everybody that we're going to need to triple operating profit, they'll fold their arms and go, you're kidding me, right? What do you think? We suck right now? You don't think we're working hard enough right now? What are you talking about? Let's just like go away. That's just the immediate immune system response. So what we did is we really thought about it for a while, and we basically got 150 of the most connected, and that wasn't the most hierarchically superior. Of course, there was some hierarchy in the room because there has to be power in the room to make things happen. But also there were the people who could make things happen, if you like, who were influential despite not being hierarchically important. And we simply said, how would you triple operating profit? And we organized, it was complicated to organize, a 3-day seminar in Holland where we got people together and organized a large group conversation. And one of the things that's really important when you're doing organizational change is knowing how to facilitate large group processes, because that's an important element of the work. How do you get whole communities together to look at those things using open space, future search processes like that? And basically, where are we already doing it? And where would you do that? From the outside in, from the inside out, where, etc. And at the end of the 3 days, and a lot of hard work and follow-up in terms of processing the data that came from that, the answer was triple operating profit. What are you talking about? We can do this by ×5. Why didn't we think about this before? Right. So there was a lot of suddenly, wow, this isn't that difficult, because we could buy a company. Oh, okay, if we could buy a company, which one would you buy? Oh, fantastic. All right, well, if you're talking about buying a company, then so it's just, we kind of like unleashed the creativity and the innovation and the open mindset for 3 days, and then put a very rigorous program around that, because that's where, you have to then put that into the system, right, to make it happen. And we kept on getting that community back and back and back. And Marvin Weisborg said something. He's the guy who invented open space. Is people will engage with and deliver that which they've had a hand in creating. So of course, because it was theirs and everybody came back buzzed up from it, etc. And of course there was resistance and people were saying no, etc. But the people who carried the community were saying yes to this. So that kind of infected the bug. And so what happened after 2 years of very hard works, and we had to repeat that, in Singapore and in Sao Paulo, with lots of different sessions and lots of different business units. And we engaged the whole community of 3,000, and we tripled operating profit, or they tripled operating profit. Listen to we, it's not my company. They tripled operating profit in 2 years, 1 year ahead of schedule. And the Financial Times wrote them up as the most innovative European asset manager in its class, compared to 2 years ago when nobody would have been buying their products and services. So it was a real transformation. It was a really good example. And none of that would have happened if we hadn't started with engaging first.
I already read this before, because this is one of the case studies that you shared with me, and I was fairly impressed, because there was a lot. I mean, I obviously have the full overview, but there was a lot of percentages here and there, like growth that you could see throughout the whole timeline of the project, that was very significant to also a sense of ownership from the people that were working towards that same goal, right? Like, so it's nice that you said that they had some hands on this project, so they felt like committed to, if this worked, it's because I put a seed on it, right? So it's not just the company wants this change and they're just saying that this is what we need. It's just an embodiment, and also the shared goal of making everyone aware that this is for the better good of everyone as well.
How do you help the whole human system really engage with what it is that you're trying to do? And the way in which you do that is by asking them what they think, how that should work. It's not rocket science, but it doesn't happen very often. So
it sounds easier, right? Sounds easier than it actually is, especially, because, we can be very stubborn, especially to change. So how would you approach the identification and assessment of the need of change within our organization? And what methods or tools do you employ to understand the impact and potential associated with change?
The example I'd like to talk around this is to give you the context of a major retailer in the UK, not just in the UK, but also internationally, was going through what at the time was called the middle market squeeze. And this was, basically these big retailers with a lot of, sort of properties, invested in properties where people traditionally go and shop and buy, were being replaced by the boutiques, were being replaced by, the discounters, and were also starting to be encroached in terms of what was going on in terms of the online market as well. With a cost base, those three organizations, if you like, those three competitors had a much lower cost base. And profits were really difficult to come by in this retail organization. So they put out a challenge and said, how do we increase cash? How do we increase income in the top 50 stores? And it was almost like a little competition between different consultancies. And we were asked that question. And I was working with a team. I wasn't leading it. Somebody else was leading it. Simon Scott was leading it. And it was really amazing in terms of basically what Simon found was that the full-time equivalent sales advisors, the people who were typically used for stacking shelves, making sure the store was tidy, moving goods around, etc., knew an awful lot about what was going on in terms of customer flow, in terms of their shop, in terms of the goods, in terms of everything. But they weren't empowered to do anything except what they were told, because the supervisors were like, you do this now, you do this now, literally from 1 hour to the next. And maybe the really good ones would be empowered to maybe run a day by themselves or a week by themselves, but there was no empowerment. And so what we did is we said, well, why don't we do this? What is it that a full-time equivalent sales advisor can move the dial on? Well, they can't buy goods because that's the buying teams. but what is it they have influence over? And we found out that they had influence over 4 areas. One is, does the customer know? And I'll talk about Mary because she was selling leather bags, right? That was her section, right? Does the customer know that we sell leather bags, leather goods in this store? Once they found out, well, why don't I talk to the window display team, right? I'm not going to go and get a marketing budget for that, but I can talk to the window display team and put bags in the window, right? Okay, so why don't I do that? Once they go, oh, there's bags in there, how easy is it to find the section? So once I go into the store, well, why don't I talk to the signage team? And once they've found the section, how easy is it to shop? And once they've shopped it, what sort of service do they need? I'm a husband, I'm looking for my wife's handbag, her birthday's tomorrow, what do I do? I've got all the time in the world, I've got a lot of disposable income, it's a Tuesday afternoon, I'm just browsing. So what is the service that that person needs depending on the context? And so we said, well, okay, if you can have a handle on those 4 levers, do we have the goods? Can I find the goods? Can I shop the goods? And can I have service for these goods? Then why don't we empower the full-time equivalent sales advisor to do that? And what we need to do is we need to give them the data. We need to give them the takings. Oh, we can't give them the takings. Oh no, said management. No, that's communism. That's not allowed. You know, oh no, what are you talking about? Well, no, we do, because otherwise they won't know whether the actions they're taking are making a difference, because they won't be able to compare the takings. So going back to Mary, after months of working on this with the trial stores, we had 9 trial stores. There was a royal train coming in from head office, big senior manager, head of the leather goods section, and he stood in front of the leather goods section and he said, I won't say what he said, is it that you're not putting in the layout that we at head office have told you to put out? This is to Mary, right? This is in front of customers, right? And bad language, the whole thing. And Mary turned around and calmly said, I did do the layout that you recommended from head office, that you sort of gave us for head office for this season's ranges. I noticed that takings were down by 30%. So I reorganized the goods and the section because customers preferred the older ranges, and takings have been up 30% for the last 3 weeks. Boom. That's it. Fantastic, right? It's wonderful, right? So when you are asking people to make change and to do change, give them the levers that they have control over to enact the change in their area. And I've prepared for this because I think this is a wonderful quote. This is by James Clear in Atomic Habits, is you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Work on your systems and habits which precede your goals. And so you basically need to create a context where people can actually work on the systems that support the behavior change, and then you get the behavior change. What typically happens is we want this change to happen, and there's usually very little enabling support that is then given, especially in a relationship and empowerment sort of way. People talk about empowerment all the time. The 9 trial stores did 9% increase in takings in cash, top line takings, and the top 50 delivered a 3.5% increase in takings as a result of it. Direct correlation to empowering sales staff to do what they could do in terms of managing their own sections. It's just and so that's how you. I don't know if that's answered that question, but there you go. That's how I would like to have answered it.
So the next question that I'm making, it's very connected to what you just said, right? So it's how do you promote employee engagement and buy-in periods of organizational change? And what steps do you take to address resistance or concerns that may arise? So the example that you just used with the manager coming in and being like, why did you do this? And then the employee kind of explaining that they, just thought this was best for sales, and it was. So it's kind of connected to that example, but would you like to add anything else to how to promote engagement?
I would love to add to that example, and it speaks of why change often fails. And often when I'm working with senior leaders, I often get the question, which is, how do we overcome the resistance that people have in what's happening? And this example, and I think another example I'll speak to in a little while, will also speak to that. And the answer to that question is look to yourself, look in the mirror. So the example of this full-time equivalent empowered sales advisor, the project failed because what we didn't do, and this was many years ago, and I've learned a lot since, and I would address that now, is that there was no context for that change to take place when we as consultants left, because the supervisors and the store managers and the buying groups were so invested in being in charge. They were deeply, deeply uninterested in the full-time equivalent sales advisors telling them how to run their own sections or giving them customer feedback. And so despite the fact that we had a 4% increase, 3.5% increase in sales, top line sales, cash coming in, right, to the business, 9% on the pilot, so the potential was huge, right, increase. It just died because the managers just weren't interested in empowering the staff. They were interested in being right. They were interested in telling people what to do. They were interested in maintaining their own power. And despite trying very hard, but it was the wrong place to start. And this is going back to one of the questions, which is what role does leadership play? There was no context for the managers and the supervisors in those stores to also be supported in how they adapted their role to empower the full-time equivalent sales advisors. And I've been in a few projects where, despite the fact that we know what works, despite the fact that the data was being produced, despite the fact that the results were coming in, it just quietly dies a death because the people who are invested in keeping things as they are at a middle management level. So you got your senior leaders saying, we need this change. You got the people down on the shop floor going, okay, what's the big deal? We can do this, right? And you got the people who are the most resistant to that change in the middle going, no, I think we're quite happy where we are. I think we'll stay as we are, because that I'm just not going to give up my identity as supervisor, as manager, etc. And so and that's why that example I gave you before around engaging in the triple operating profit example in that asset manager, because we bypassed all of that by engaging those leaders who were going to be the translators down into their teams. And that's, I think, one of the biggest learnings I've had in my career is you have to engage that middle group. Otherwise, they just fold their arms, and they just sit there and going, nope, we can wait here longer than you can. And they do.
Yeah, I think that the whole system should be involved in order for it to actually thrive, right? So in your experience, what are the key elements of a successful change management plan, and how do you ensure its effective implementation and monitoring?
So the answer to that one is, I think, really blindingly simple, which is that at no point should any of the change plans that you've got be disconnected from the real business goals. So if the change has got nothing to do with your outcomes and objectives as an organization, stop wasting your time. It's very simple. This is something that I'm just starting with, is a leader I'm working with, has just started working with at the moment, which is how do you get a sales team to change their mindset from, hey, we're doing really well, to actually, yeah, we're doing really well, but we're servicing customers with way too low margin. We need to increase our margin. Yeah, but that means I'm going to have to say goodbye to customers that I really love. Yeah, I know it's a low margin business, but I've built this relationship for X years. Yeah, I understand that, but we're going to need to, if we're going to need to choose, why don't we do that and maybe increase prices? I don't want to have that tough conversation. So how do you implement those systems? Well, the answer to that question would be, one, make sure that absolutely everybody's KPIs and objectives are aligned with that change. I'll give you an example. I was working with a client where the objective was to increase productivity by 30% or decrease costs by 30%. And this was like most of my clients, all of my clients, knowledge workers. So basically cost base as human beings, either reduce your staff by 30% or increase 30% productivity. And the HR department's response to that was, we're going to give everybody a performance management course. And I was like, well, yeah, maybe, but not really. That's not going to turn the dial. I did some inquiry, and the second person I saw was the finance director. And I walked into his office to talk to him about this project. And he said, you're dead. This project is dead. And I said, okay, hello, welcome to you too. Nice to meet you. And it transpired that basically, in order to fund the project, the chief exec had taken something like 40–50% of this FD's budget and dedicated it to the program. So of course he was like, well, and that ain't going to happen, right? So I went back to the chief exec and said, can we change this so that you give that budget back and I report to the finance director? Oh, yeah, okay, sure, we can do that. Next meeting, welcome, hello, I'm so glad, blah, blah. It's like, okay, so if you want to affect change, yes, you have to put in rigorous processes and systems. Yes, you have to make sure that you have all the project teams and tracking measurements and metrics. But the bottom line is you need to ally, first of all, interests and power. And if you don't, then forget about it. You will just simply have people who are talking past each other and sometimes getting fired because of it. So the first thing in terms of if you really want to make change happen is how are you making sure that you're aligning interests and power and making sure that the people who make the decisions, have access to the resources, are actually talking the same conversation with each other.
So can you discuss a situation where you had to balance the need to change with the potential disruption it may cause from the existing process or structures within an organization? Like how have you managed this balance?
It's actually similar to the example I gave just now around the 30% productivity increase or decrease in staff. So there was an integration of two very large organizations, household names, international household names of 60,000 people. So 45,000 person company coming together with the rest. Germany meets the Scandinavian culture. So how do we do the process to who's in charge, right? So that's the culture clash, right? And basically for the first years, I was working with and for the chief operating officer. They were operating under two finance systems, the existing finance system in one company and the existing finance system in the other company. And when you're looking at reconciling two different finance systems to find out what your P&L is, what your cost base is, where you're putting your CapEx, what your EBITDA is, all those things, then it's really quite difficult to do that if you've got board members at the top from one company and the other company merging, talking different languages. And I would say, in my assessment, that the board was driving blind for 2 years. For a massive organization to not know what was going on, right? Until they understood that what they needed to do was to actually ask for the same data together. Because of course, what was happening, everybody's going, I'm flying behind, I don't know what I'm doing, what do you expect me to do? I don't know what my sales target is, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, I don't know what my spending, blah, 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 etc. And then would go back and say, give me my favorite system. I don't give me that system. That's not how I look at my numbers. I want to look at my numbers like I'm used to looking at my numbers. And so because that demand was coming from the board down into their leaders, down further into the organization, the poor finance team was being salami sliced and caught in machine gun fire left, right, and center, and basically weren't able to provide the data until the board, the executive team, not the board, the executive team started saying and agreed, we need to ask for the data in the same way. And that took 4 days of an offsite to agree. But this is after 2 years of running blind, right? Okay, so this is like craziness, right?
That was short.
So again, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And that's, for me, a really strong example of where you can just measure the effectiveness of an organizational change, or you can actually destroy organizational change because you simply don't have the right language and metrics in place.
Yeah, so I have one last question for you.
Okay.
So I want to know, what strategies or practices do you employ to ensure the organizational change is sustainable and embedded within the culture of the organization rather than a one-time event?
So when I was thinking about this question, I came up with more failures than successes. And the failures were around overly attaching a particular organizational change to a particular leader or leadership team. And when that leader or leadership team goes away, the change collapses. So it's almost like you're pushing a balloon down in the water, right? And you're holding it down, you're holding it down, you're holding it down through sheer force of personality, through just, we are going to make this happen. And then when you leave it, whoosh, everything goes back to what it was. And so that's absolutely, so you're absolutely right. That needs, so it goes back to, how are you embedding those changes in the practices and systems of the organization, of the wider organization, as opposed to just the personalities of the leader? And you need to make sure that you don't separate the changes from the core business aims, and that they're absolutely synonymous with each other. I think I've said that one. And on a very human level, and I'll use William Schutz and FIRO for this, which is that, and I've structured whole organizational change projects, or we've structured whole organizational change projects around this very simple model, this very simple way of looking at it, is that in order to identify with the change, or identify with the society that you belong to, the tribe that you're in, you need to feel included. So people have inclusion needs. Where do I belong in the tribe? Who am I right here, right now? When you're joining a team, the first thing is, who are you, who am I, and how do we relate? So you need to absolutely understand that if you're not meeting people's inclusion needs, which is to do with getting the town halls, which is to do with the communication, which is to do with getting them to workshop how they would implement the change in their section or in their unit. So include people, right? So that's inclusion. Secondly, you need to give people an element of control. People want agency over things. What produces resistance to change is powerlessness. What produces resistance to change is asking knowledge workers to blindly follow instructions. People just don't. It's just something that happens to us inside. And actually, the people who do aren't the ones who are going to lead the change. They're just the ones who are going to follow that. And there's not the right people that you want to tap into the energy of the people who are rebellious, who are going to be going, no, we should do this differently. We could do it better. And so you tap into the anger that the resistance is that the change is producing, because in that anger lies a solution. Because people are saying, that's going to lose us our customers. Have you thought about the implication of that? What are you doing? Are you dreaming? What if we do that, then this means that? Because they know what the impact is on their workstation, on their customers, or on their reality. So you need to have a conversation where you don't give over control, but where you do mediate control, and where you do give people a voice and an authority in terms of their domain experience and expertise. And then finally, you need to be open. And that means that there needs to be something more than just, we need more cash, EBITDA, more units of this, more units of that. Okay, fine. I'm really not going to get up for you to do more units of this and more units of that. However, I'm going to get up in the morning because I'm really engaged in a particular change. So when we were closing down a major retailer in the UK, which is still very functional and doing successful work in Europe, across Europe, we had a very simple metric, which was, we are going to include everybody in this. We're going to give you control, and we're going to be completely open that in this date, in 18 months from now, we will close. That will be it. But the metric is 75% of people who want to in a better or equivalent job. And everybody was equipped with a little PowerPoint where they would be able to say, in the change of this household brand name, closing it down, I was working in the supply chain, doing these things in the warehouse, and this is the difference I made, and these were the results that we made. Guess what? We exceeded 75%. I think it was 82% of people who wanted an equivalent job or better one got one. right? Because they came out as highly motivated, highly engaged, really competent, experienced retail staff in their sectors. So of course, everybody said, yeah, I'll have a piece of those. And so we engaged those people in that. And what ended up being, I think the reason they shut down that operation and that retail chain in the UK was because they lost hundreds of millions. But basically, at the end of it, we'd saved 60 million in closure costs. So the closure was a net gain, if you like. There was no expenditure, if you like. And the company made a small profit for the first time in 5 years with no increase in staff, because we just mobilized everybody around, are you included? Do you have a say? And is there a reason for you to not just be closing and going, but also to be proud of this story that you can go somewhere else with it? And that was it's one of the proudest projects I've done. Other things I'm very proud of, but that was one that I would say inclusion, control, and openness, and just run a whole change project around that way of looking at things.
So I am going to summarize somewhat everything that we just talked about, because I just want our listeners and our viewers to kind of keep, a small kind of bite size of this episode, if you may. So one of the main things that you said before about organizational change is to look into the human element, that this is key to actually enable the change, because we are the ones that resist the system. And then you follow up with a couple of qualities of the leaders and the people that are leading to change, which were to recognize change needs to happen, for these people to be the ones to recognize it, right? To walk the change, so be a role model towards this change that you so proudly are embodying, and to emotionally identify yourself with the change that's going to happen within the organization. Then you follow up with this everybody feeling a sense of commitment. So we talked about ownership, right? Feeling a sense of belonging. And then you shared James Clear quote, which is kind of summarizing the whole episode, right? That we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. I actually read that book, so I recommend it as well if you're having some trouble sticking to cohesive habits that actually enable change within organizations or within yourself, which is also an important component, going back to the human side. At no point should this change be disconnected to the company's goals. So that is one thing important, and one thing to take into account whenever you're moving forward to enable organizational change. And just kind of give a level of control, mediate control, enable some, anger, so you can get some additional solutions that you wouldn't get otherwise, embed the changes within the organization, and attach them to the organization, not the leaders, because if the leaders leave, then you get no change. You don't get it within the system. So if I hope I did justice to summarize almost everything that we have discussed here. Would you like to add anything to it?
I think that's cool. Thank you, Amanda. It's been really, really pleasurable to talk to you. Thank you.
It was lovely having you, Alex. Thank you so much for accepting once again the invitation to come join the podcast. Hope you had a great time. I sure did. I sure learned a couple of things, especially that we quote the same person. But yeah, if you wanna find some more information about this topic or any other learning and development topic, make sure to follow us on every social media, or you can also look for information in unloq.org. That's UNLOQ.org. And to our listeners or viewers, stay tuned as we continue to unlock human potential.